The morning Colton Mercer grabbed a stranger's hand and told his mother they were engaged. He didn't even know her name. It started, as most disasters in his life did, with his mother calling at 7 in the morning. "She's flying in from Boston on Friday," Margaret Mercer said, her voice carrying that particular brightness she reserved for announcements he had no say in. "Isabelle Fontaine. Her father and I went to school together. You'll take her to dinner." Colton was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching the Chicago skyline turn gold in the early light, coffee in hand, already exhausted. He was 38 years old. He had built Mercer Capital from a 2-room office in Wicker Park into a firm that managed $4 billion in assets. He had survived a market crash, 2 recessions, and a hostile takeover attempt that made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And somehow, still, his mother could make him feel like a boy who hadn't cleaned his room. "Mom," he said, "don't mom me. You haven't brought anyone home in 3 years. People talk. People can talk about something else." "Friday, Colton. 7 o'clock. I'm making a reservation at Oriole." She hung up before he could argue, which was her signature move, practiced and perfected over 4 decades. He stood there a moment longer, looking at the city. Then he set down his coffee, picked up his phone, and called his assistant to cancel Friday's schedule. The new barista started that Tuesday. Colton had a standing order at the coffee bar on the ground floor of his building. A single espresso. No sugar, no small talk. He'd been using the same elevator, the same lobby, the same coffee counter every morning for 6 years, and in that time he had learned the names of exactly none of the staff. Not because he was cruel. He simply didn't think about it. She was behind the counter when he came down at 8:15, tying her apron strings with the focused attention of someone who had been thrown into the deep end and was determined not to drown. Her name tag said Hazel. Her dark hair was pulled back. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow and the look of someone who had already been awake for 4 hours before he'd opened his eyes. "Morning," she said. "What can I get you?" he told her. She made it without unnecessary conversation, which he appreciated. He left without looking back. This happened Wednesday, then Thursday. On Friday morning, his mother texted, "Isabelle's flight lands at noon. Please be charming." He deleted the message and went downstairs. He was waiting for his espresso when the lobby doors opened and Margaret Mercer walked in, which was so unlikely that for a moment Colton simply stared. His mother never came downtown. She lived in Lincoln Park and considered anything south of North Avenue to be someone else's problem. She was not alone. Beside her walked a tall, polished woman in a cream blazer. Isabelle Fontaine, presumably. Flight landed early. Plan accelerated without notice. His mother caught his eye across the lobby and her face did something complicated and triumphant. He had maybe 4 seconds. Later, he would try to explain it differently. He would tell himself he wasn't thinking clearly, that the espresso hadn't hit yet, that any reasonable man would have simply walked across the lobby and shaken hands and endured one dinner. But the truth was simpler and less flattering. He panicked. He turned to the counter. Hazel was sliding his cup toward him when he reached across and took her hand. She went very still. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, not looking at her, watching his mother close the distance across the marble floor. "I'll explain in a minute, please." Hazel looked down at his hand on hers. Then she looked up at him. Her expression was not frightened, it was not confused. It was, he would think about later, almost professionally calm, the look of someone who had handled stranger things before breakfast. "Colton." His mother arrived, Isabel at her shoulder, both of them impeccably put together and radiating expectation. "What a coincidence. We thought we'd stop by and walk you out to lunch." "Mom," Colton said, "I'd like you to meet someone." He felt Hazel's hand tighten almost imperceptibly under his. Whether it was warning or agreement, he couldn't tell. "This is Hazel," he said. "We've been seeing each other for a few months." The lobby was quiet except for the sound of the espresso machine cycling down. Margaret looked at Hazel, at her apron, at the name tag, at their joined hands. "I see," Margaret said, in the tone she used when she did not in fact see and intended to see very clearly at the earliest available opportunity. Isabelle Fontaine smiled the polished smile of a woman who had been spared something and was gracious enough not to show relief. Hazel waited until they left. Then she retrieved her hand, picked up a cloth, and began wiping down the counter with the systematic efficiency of someone buying time to arrange her thoughts. "So," she said. "I know," Colton said. You told your mother we've been dating for months. I don't know your last name, Mercer. Colton Mercer. She stopped wiping. Something shifted in her face, a brief, involuntary flicker, gone before he could read it. Mercer capital, yes. She looked at him for a long moment. He was used to people looking at him with calculation when they heard the name, running quick math on what it meant, what it might mean for them. Hazel's expression was different. She wasn't calculating. She was deciding something. What exactly do you need? She said. He told her the truth, which surprised him. He wasn't generally a man who volunteered the truth when a strategic version would do. His mother had been arranging his personal life since his father died 8 years ago. Isabel was the third candidate in 2 years. One dinner would become a second dinner would become a photograph in the Tribune's society pages, and then he'd be 40 and engaged to someone whose primary qualification was that their families had summered in the same place. Hazel listened without interrupting. I need 2 months, he said. Enough time for my mother to accept that I'm not available. I'll compensate you for your time. Whatever number you think is fair, I'll double it. She looked at him the way people look at a door they're not sure they should open. I'm not doing it for money, she said finally. He blinked. In his experience, everyone did everything for money, even if they framed it differently. Then why? She thought about it. Because you said please, she said. Nobody in this building has ever said please to me. Her full name was Hazel Voss. She was 29. She had a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Northwestern that she'd paid for herself, working nights and weekends through all 4 years. And she was saving money to finish a graduate application she'd put on hold when her younger brother got sick 2 years ago. She'd taken the coffee bar job because it was in the same building as a research lab she was trying to get into, and proximity felt like strategy. Colton learned all of this in pieces over the following 2 weeks because his mother was thorough. She wants to have dinner, he told Hazel on a Tuesday. The 4 of us. She's invited my sister. Hazel looked at him over the counter. Your sister, Claudia. She's 26 and has a talent for asking questions that sound polite. I've met Claudius, Hazel said. I'll manage. What he didn't tell her was that Claudia had already texted him 17 times since their mother mentioned it, each message more gleeful than the last. A barista, his sister had written. Colton, I am delight. Mom is going to completely lose her mind. I love her already and I've never met her. He didn't tell Hazel that because it felt unfair. She wasn't a performance for his family's entertainment, though he was increasingly unsure she would care. Hazel had a way of being entirely unconcerned with what she was supposed to be. The dinner was at his mother's house in Lincoln Park, which was designed to put people at ease and, in practice, did the opposite. It was full of original artwork and specific silverware, and a housekeeper named Rosario who had opinions about folded napkins. Hazel arrived in a dark green dress that she'd clearly owned for a while and not purchased for the occasion, which Colton noticed and his mother certainly noticed and Claudia noticed with visible delight. I've heard so much about you, Claudia said, shaking Hazel's hand. By which I mean I've heard almost nothing, which is even more interesting. I've heard about you too, Hazel said pleasantly. Colton mentioned the questions. Claudia looked at her brother with fresh appreciation. Margaret Mercer was more careful. She had the instincts of someone who had navigated several decades of social performance, and she used them. She was gracious, attentive, and relentlessly probing in a way that sounded like warmth. She asked about Hazel's family, her background, her plans. Hazel answered everything directly and without apology, which was not what Margaret was prepared for. She'd met women who were nervous in this house, and women who were aggressive, and women who tried to charm. Hazel simply talked to her like one adult talking to another, which left Margaret with fewer handles than she was used to finding. Biochemistry, Margaret said. That's very specific. It is, Hazel agreed. And you left the field. I stepped away for a while. My brother needed help. He's doing better now, so I'm stepping back. Your parents, gone, Hazel said simply. Not with drama. Not with the performed stoicism people sometimes use to deflect. Just a clean fact delivered and moved past. I've been on my own for a while. It's fine. Margaret looked at her son. Colton was watching Hazel, and something in his face made his mother go quiet for a moment. Claudia reached for the breadbasket and pretended not to notice. The arrangement had rules, most of them Hazel's. They would be seen together occasionally. A lunch, a necessary event, but she had her own schedule and he would not assume access to it. She didn't want gifts. She didn't want him to intervene in her professional situation at the building. She had applied for the lab position on her own qualifications, and she intended to get it that way. And she would be honest with him, which meant he had to be honest with her, even when it was inconvenient. "That last one's going to be the hard part for you," she told him on the Thursday of the third week, handing him his espresso. "Why do you say that?" "Because you've been trying to figure out how to tell me something for the last 4 days and you keep deciding not to." He looked at her. She looked back, patient as a clock. "I ran a background check on you," he said, "before I agreed to this. Standard procedure. I do it with everyone who enters into a formal arrangement with me." She was quiet for a moment. "And your brother's medical bills. I know the number." She set down the cloth she'd been holding. "So you felt sorry for me?" "No," he said. "I felt concerned. Those are different things. They feel the same from where I'm standing." "I know. I'm telling you anyway, because you asked me to be honest." He paused. "I didn't use it to make a decision. I only mention it because you'd be angry if you found out later I knew and hadn't said so." Hazel looked at him for a long time. He had the unsettling experience of being read, not evaluated, not assessed, but actually read, like something she was trying to understand rather than use. "You're more self-aware than you look," she said finally. "Is that a compliment?" "Borderline." The complication arrived in week 5 in the form of a phone call from Hazel's ex-employer. Not a reference call, she later explained, but something more deliberate. Someone had asked questions about her. Someone with resources had been tracing her work history, her references, her professional contacts. She came to him on a Wednesday morning, 20 minutes before her shift ended, and told him without preamble. He already knew. He'd been told by his own security team the night before, which was the second thing he had to tell her, and which did not go well. "You had someone watching me," she said. "Monitoring, not watching. There's a Colton." He stopped. "I'm not angry about the monitoring," she said. Her voice was even, which he'd learned was not a good sign. "I understand why you'd do that. I'm angry that you knew yesterday and you let me come in here and tell you like it was news." He had no defense for that one. He'd made a calculation. He'd wanted to see how she handled it, what she'd do, whether she'd come to him. And she had. And now he felt for the first time in a long time genuinely ashamed of a decision he'd made. "You're right," he said. "I should have called you last night." She looked at him. "Who do you think is asking about me?" "My mother." She absorbed this. "She's trying to find something. She's thorough. I know." She was quiet for a moment. "There's something to find." The lobby was empty. The espresso machine was off. Outside, traffic moved in its usual indifferent stream. "My father worked for a company called Aldrich Partners," she said. 15 years ago. He found evidence of financial fraud, significant fraud, the kind that moved money from pension funds into private accounts. He reported it internally. 3 months later, he was pushed out and blacklisted. 2 years after that, he had a heart attack. She paused. He was 44. Colton was very still. Aldrich Partners was acquired in 2018, Hazel said. "By Mercer Capital," he said. "By Mercer Capital," she confirmed. "I know you weren't running the firm then. I know it was your father's deal. I looked into it before I agreed to your arrangement." She met his eyes. "I'm not telling you this as leverage. I'm telling you because you asked me to be honest. And I have been, and now you need to know why I'm not surprised that your mother is digging." He sat with that for a long moment. The thing about Hazel, the thing that had been accumulating for 5 weeks, without him naming it, was that she never did what he expected. He had been prepared for anger, for demands, for the moment when the arrangement became transactional in a way he couldn't control. Instead, she sat across from him and told him the truth in the same tone she used to tell him his espresso was ready. "Do you blame me?" he said. "No," she said. "Your father made a bad deal a long time ago. You've spent 8 years cleaning up after it. How do you know that?" "I read," she said simply. "I've been reading about your company for 2 years. I applied for that lab position 9 months before I started working downstairs." She looked at him steadily. "I wanted to be near the records. I thought maybe if I got inside, I could find documentation. Something that would prove what happened to my father wasn't random." The morning light moved across the marble floor between them. "You didn't need me at all," he said. "I didn't need your arrangement," she agreed. "But I think I might have needed you." She said it without drama, without softness, the way she said everything, like a fact she'd checked twice before stating. He called his mother that afternoon. Hazel's father, he said when Margaret picked up. Thomas Voss. He worked at Aldrich. A long silence. Colton, I want the records from the acquisition, the internal documentation on the Aldrich transition. Whatever you and Dad kept, your father handled that personally. I know. I want the records, Mom. Another silence, different in quality, softer. She told you, Margaret said. She was going to tell me eventually. She's that kind of person. He heard his mother breathing on the other end. Then, slowly, the records are in your father's study. I never moved them. I never knew what to do with them. I'm coming over, he said. Colton. His mother's voice had changed. Not defeated. Margaret Mercer did not do defeat, but careful. Honest in a way she didn't often allow herself. She's not what I expected. I know. She's better, Margaret said quietly. I didn't want to see it, but she's better. He found what he needed in 4 hours of going through his father's files. Correspondence, internal memos, a trail of decisions that should have been challenged and weren't. He also found a letter his father had written and never sent, addressed to no one, dated 2 weeks before the acquisition closed, that said simply, I should have looked harder. I didn't want to know. He sat with that letter for a long time. Then he called his attorney. He didn't tell Hazel right away. He spent a week working with his legal team, tracing what could be traced, preparing a formal finding. He wanted to give her something real, not a gesture. She noticed he was distracted. She didn't press. She handed him his espresso in the mornings with her usual minimal conversation. And once, on a Thursday, she said, You're working on something. And he said, Yes. And she nodded and let it be, which was more consideration than most people in his life had ever given him. When the documentation was ready, he asked her to have lunch with him. Not the kind of lunch they'd had for his mother's benefit. A corner table at a restaurant he liked, quiet enough to talk. He slid a folder across the table. She opened it slowly. He watched her read, the careful page-by-page attention of someone who had been waiting for a long time and was determined not to rush now that the moment had arrived. Her hands were steady. Her face did not break the way he'd expected. She simply read and turned pages and read some more. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked out the window at the street. This is enough, she said, for a formal complaint. Maybe more. My attorneys think so. If you want to pursue it, they'll represent you. The firm will cover costs. No conditions, she looked at him. Why? Because it's right, he said, and because your father deserved better than what he got from this company. She was quiet for a moment, then, Your father didn't know the full picture. He didn't want to. That's different from innocent, but it's also different from deliberate. He paused. I've been thinking about that a lot, about the difference. Hazel looked at the folder. He was 44, she said. My dad. Same age as your father when he did the deal. She didn't say it as an accusation. She said it the way she said everything, like a fact she'd lived with long enough to hold without flinching. I know, Colton said. She looked up at him, and for the first time in 6 weeks the careful professionalism was gone, replaced by something she hadn't let him see before. Not vulnerability exactly. More like recognition, the look of someone who has been alone with something heavy for a long time, and has just unexpectedly set it down. Thank you, she said. Don't, he said. I'm not done. He was not in fact done. He called her that evening and told her the lab position had been filled 3 weeks ago, internally, which she hadn't been told, and that had found out through channels she wouldn't like. She was quiet on the phone for a moment. You're telling me so I can be angry. I'm telling you so you can plan. Those are the same thing. For about 20 minutes, yes. After that they diverge. She made a sound he hadn't heard from her before. Something between exasperation and laughter. Are you always like this? I'm told I'm improving. By who? My sister, my mother recently. And you on a borderline basis. There was a pause, the warm kind. There's another lab, she said. University of Chicago. Their application window opens in March. I know someone on the faculty selection committee, he said. I won't say anything to them. But if you want an introduction, a straight introduction, no favors asked. I can do that. An introduction is fine, she said. I'll handle the rest. I know you will, he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant something in a long time. He told his mother in December that the arrangement had become something else, though he didn't use those words. They were sitting in her kitchen, which was the only room in the house that felt like a real room. Worn countertops, a cluttered corkboard, Rosario's plant on the windowsill. The Voss business, his mother said. How did she take it? Like she takes everything. That well? She cried once, he said. She didn't know I saw. Margaret looked at him. You're not pretending anymore. No. She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. I tried to find something wrong with her, she said. For 6 weeks I looked. Did you find anything? She returned a $20 overpayment to a customer 3 months ago, Margaret said. Flagged it herself and went to the trouble of tracking him down. She paused. That's not wrong. That's the opposite. Colton was quiet. Your father would have liked her, Margaret said. He liked people who did the difficult thing when they didn't have to. She looked at her coffee. He also didn't always do it himself, but he admired it. I know, Colton said. Don't make his mistakes, she said. Not as a warning. As a gift, the most honest thing she knew how to give him. Hazel got into the University of Chicago program in February. She called him from the parking lot of the grocery store, which was where she happened to be when the email came through, and she was laughing in a way he hadn't heard before. Loose and entirely unself-conscious, the sound of someone who had worked for something for so long that the arrival of it was almost too large to hold. He drove to the parking lot. She was sitting on the hood of her car when he got there, phone still in hand, still slightly disbelieving. She looked up when he pulled in. You didn't have to come, she said. I know, he said. He sat beside her on the hood, which was not something he had done since he was 19, and had a different relationship with undignified behavior. The parking lot was ordinary and fluorescent, and smelled like February in Chicago. Neither of them said anything for a while. I've been thinking, Hazel said eventually, about what you said. About the difference between not knowing and not wanting to know. What about it? I think that's what I was doing too. For 2 years I came to that building and I told myself it was about the records, about my father, about what was right. She looked at the sky, which was the flat gray of a Chicago winter and beautiful in its own specific way. And it was. But it wasn't only that. No, he said. I saw you on your first day, she said. Before I started working there, I was in the lobby for an interview and you walked through. You didn't see me. You never see anyone in the lobby. She said it without reproach. I thought, that's the kind of man I need to not need. The kind who moves through rooms like no one else is in them. I was wrong about that. You were, she agreed. But you figured it out. He looked at her in the February parking lot light. She was not a woman who needed to be told things. She was not a woman who needed much of anything from him, which had been, he realized, the most alarming and compelling discovery of the last 6 months. He had spent 20 years accumulating things to offer people, and she made him set them all down and show up as just himself, which was far more frightening and far more important. I'd like to keep doing this, he said. Whatever this is. She considered him with the same steady attention she'd given everything, since the morning he'd reached across a counter and taken her hand without asking. I know, she said. I'd like that too. Above them, the gray sky held, and the parking lot was entirely ordinary, and neither of them moved for a while, which was its own kind of answer.